Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to speak about what happened in Gaza about a year and a half ago. And to some extent, it's a kind of curiosity why one should talk about Gaza nearly 16 months after those 22 days. Because death and destruction, murder and mayhem, war, they occur with such frequency, such rapidity in the Middle East that memories of what happened usually pass with the blink of an eye. But something peculiar happened with Gaza. It's a ghost which Israel, try as it may, has been unsuccessful in trying to bury. It's a shadow which Israel can't evade. And that does prompt the question, why won't Gaza go away? Why is it as much a live issue as unique this evening? Why is it that it keeps recurring in the news in one form or another, whether it be what happened in Gaza or whether it be the assaults on the name and the person of Richard Goldstone? Why won't Gaza go away? And that's one topic which I want to look at this evening. But before I do that, I want to look at the background, because that part, how we got to those 22 days, has been in large part forgotten, or more exactly, it's been rewritten. So let's try to start. It's always arbitrary where you begin. I'll begin with January 2006, when there were parliamentary elections in the occupied Palestinian territories, and Hamas, the Islamic movement, it won the elections which former President Jimmy Carter, who was one of the international observers, was careful to maintain the ceasefire. But Israel reneged on its reciprocal obligation to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza, that flagrant violation of international law. What happened next? The record is perfectly clear. All you have to do is go to the Amnesty International yearbook for 2008, open up to their entry for the occupied Palestinian territories, and you'll read as follows. A ceasefire agreed in June between Israel and Palestinian armed groups in Gaza. It held for 4.5 months, but it broke down after Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian militants in airstrikes and other attacks on 4 November. The ceasefire, which Hamas was careful to maintain, the ceasefire which it maintained despite the fact that Israel reneged on its obligation to lift the blockade, the ceasefire then completely broke down because on November 4th, Israel patiently waited until our election day, when the media and the public was riveted to the results of the historic election. And on that day they chose. They invaded Gaza, killed 6 Palestinian militants, knowing full well that when they did, the ceasefire would break down, which is what happened. But then, these Islamic fundamentalists, these terrorists, these irrational, cowardly, whatever, even after Israel invaded Gaza and broke the ceasefire, Hamas kept saying, down to the end of December, we're willing to renew the ceasefire. We're ready to renew the ceasefire. All Israel has to do is agree to its original terms, or to implement its original terms, to lift the blockade of Gaza, that flagrant violation of international law, which was destroying the civilization. Israel said no. Hamas had to cease its rocket and mortar attacks unilaterally and unconditionally. By December of 2008, Sarah Roy of Harvard University, the world's leading authority on the Gaza economy, and as it happens on a personal level, the daughter of a survivor of Auschwitz concentration camp, Sarah Roy wrote, "The breakdown of an entire society is happening in front of us, but there is little international response beyond UN warnings, which are ignored. And now the people of Gaza and its leadership was confronted with two stark options: to acquiesce in their gradual starvation or to resist. Hamas chose to resist, albeit its resistance was largely symbolic. The former Israeli military commander in Gaza, his name is Shmuel Zakai, he said at the end of December, talking to Israelis, he said, "You cannot just land blows, leave the Palestinians in Gaza in the economic distress they're in, and expect that Hamas will just sit around and do nothing." During the Israeli invasion, the head of Hamas, Khalid Mishal, he wrote, our modest homemade rockets are our cry of protest to the world." What were those rocket attacks, except a desperate attempt to transmit a message to an indifferent, to an acquiescent world? SOS, we're dying. SOS, we're dying. It's easy enough to condemn, as all human rights organizations did. It's easy enough to condemn the Hamas rocket and mortar attacks on Israel. But it does seem to me that if you do condemn them, then you also have an obligation to say what other option they had. Otherwise, you are in effect saying that the people of Gaza had a legal and moral obligation to just lie still and die. In any event, on December 27, 2008, Israel invaded Gaza. Now, what happened during those 22 days? What Amnesty International called the 22 days of death and destruction. Nowadays, when people refer to those 22 days, they routinely call it the Gaza War. It was a war in Gaza, we're told. Even respectable publications, like the most recent report of Human Rights Watch, it refers in its title to the war in Gaza. You can go to your computer terminal at the library, and then all you have to do is type in the words "breaking the silence." Very simple. breaking the silence. And if you enter those words in your Google search, what will come up is a publication of testimonies by Israeli soldiers. And when you have that publication on your screen, all you have to do is enter under the search function the word insane. And if you enter the word insane, it'll come up once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. Insane, 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 insane. One soldier after another, even though they were interviewed separately and weren't cued, each soldier, the same word leapt to mind. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. No battles, no enemy in the field, but Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. One soldier said, "This was firepower such as I had never known. There were blasts all the time. The earth was constantly shaking." Another soldier said, "On the ground you hear these thunderous blasts all day long. I mean, not just tank shelling, which was a tune we'd long gotten used to, but blasts that actually rocked the outpost. To the extent that some of us were ordered out of the house, we were quartered in for fear it would collapse." The soldiers commandeered Palestinian homes, were firing into the distance, but the insane amounts of firepower were making the ground under them quake, to the point that they were fearful the houses in which they had quartered themselves would collapse on their heads. So what did happen in Gaza? Actually, the Israeli soldiers themselves came up with the most telling metaphors. One soldier said, "It felt like hunting season had begun. Sometimes it reminded me of a PlayStation computer game." Another soldier said, "You felt like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants." You felt like a child with a magnifying glass, burning up ants. I was a kid once. I had my magnifying glass. I'm not proud of it, but I have the vivid recollection focusing the rays of the sun on the anthills, turning the ants into crispy critters. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't so delusional, I don't think, as to believe I was engaged in a war with the ants. In fact, the metaphor was very precise. The child with the magnifying glass, burning up ants. One of Israel's tools of the trade, its trade, is the promiscuous use of white phosphorus. In all the wars, in my recollection, going back to June 1982, when it invaded Lebanon, Israel has made extensive use of the white phosphorus. I never really paid much attention to what white phosphorus was. It obviously had that sinister connotation, but I never looked into the details. This time, Human Rights Watch put out a report called Rain of Fire after the Gaza massacre, and it described the white phosphorus. White phosphorus reaches a temperature of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. As Ms. Oprah would say, Try wrapping your mind around that. What did Israel do with the white phosphorus? Well, Human Rights Watch said, and now I'm quoting it, Israel repeatedly exploded white phosphorus munitions in the air over populated areas, killing and injuring civilians and damaging civilian structures. It dropped the white phosphorus on a school, a marketplace, a humanitarian aid warehouse. It dropped the white phosphorus on 2 hospitals. It dropped white phosphorus in Al-Quds Hospital, and it dropped white phosphorus in Al-Wafa Hospital. Human Rights Watch says the hospitals were clearly marked, and there does not appear to have been fighting in that immediate area. By the end of those 22 days, 1,400 Palestinians have been killed. Between 5/7 and 4/5 were civilians. 358 Palestinian children were killed. On the Israeli side, 13 Israelis were killed, 3 were civilians, 10 were combatants. Half the combatants were killed by other Israelis by accident, which is called friendly fire. That means for every 100 Palestinians killed, 1 Israeli was killed. For every 400 Palestinian civilians killed, 1 Israeli civilian was killed. 100 to 1, 400 to 1. That's not a war. That's a massacre. Every time anyone refers to Gaza as a war, you have, wittingly or not, intentionally or not, become an instrument of Israeli propaganda.